We are just 1 week away from spring practice in Norman. Welcome to OU Sooners Live. We come your way each and every Wednesday at 11:30 Central Time right here at the Voice of College Football. If you have yet to do so, please subscribe to the channel. And, of course, give us a like before you get settled. And we will have discussion for you for the next hour. Leave those comments and questions there in the live chat, and Jason and I will get to them. Speaking of which, here's the guy for 49 consecutive times that has made it all possible. Jason Ray, last word on college football. Jason, how you doing?
Doing good, Mark. Thanks for having me. It's good to be close to spring practice again. Trying to get back in the mode of football.
We are getting there. We are getting there, and even the most ardent college football fans, most of them have an eye toward March and March Madness and NCAA basketball. And if your team has made it, that's great. If they haven't, then most of us are still interested in anticipating the drama that's going to unfold. It's already started to a certain extent, but of course, full throttle on a Thursday. I know that, Jason, there are a lot of hypothetical fantasy type concoctions that people come up with. I did myself. We've got 130 teams in FBS football. It rounded down pretty well. I don't know that there would be a huge controversy eliminating the worst two teams in college football to make it 128. So I think UConn and New Mexico or somebody we had to be discarded, but didn't think that they were going to make a possible run. So 1 through 128, I came up with a bracket, and I know that a lot of others have as well. I will dig some of those up. I will even dig up my own rankings because I forget who Oklahoma was matched up in the first round. They were the 10 seed overall. They were number 10 in my final 2021 rankings. So 10 versus like 119. So I'll dig that up. But
I think it was South Florida, if I remember right.
South Florida. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. South Florida was all of 2-10 last year, so that should have been easy work for Oklahoma. Those like 30 to 90 seed matchups were the ones that were the most interesting, of course. But it's fun to look at and think about, and it's of course never going to happen.
Sure. We put together on last word. I don't know that it wasn't this year. A couple of years ago, which a hypothetical 64 team. Or 68 team. I don't remember if it was 64 or 68, or if there was a couple of play-in games. But those things are kind of fun to think about. To your point, they would never happen. I mean, at the most, I think we would ever look at as probably a 12 or maybe even a 16 at some point, legitimately. But no, those are kind of fun to think about, especially when you think about the regions and locations and things like that from a hypothetical perspective. Those are pretty fun.
Absolutely. And again, I know that ESPN put one together here, but we'll dig that up at some point. As I mentioned off the top, we're just 1 week away from spring practice starting in Norman. And I did a little research on the offensive line leading into the show. I know that there were a few guys on the offensive side of the ball that you were looking at as being keys to the 2022 season for Oklahoma, but for their own personal benefit, that this would be a key to those particular players' playing time and impact on the 22 season.
Yeah, just a couple of, more than a couple, just a few. I kind of jotted down 10, and I think to your point about offensive line, I had as one of mine, I had offensive line really just as a whole and some specific people. So I'll kind of go down the list and talk through some of those guys, and really just interested to see, maybe not necessarily completely pivotal to how Oklahoma will finish, and how they project into the fall, but really just interested to see, what some of these kids look like, what it might look like, just in terms of how if they have a really good spring, what does that mean for this team? So I think, Mark, first and foremost, it always, from a fan's perspective as well, I think it always seems to point, everybody wants to look at the quarterback, right? And so I think first, obviously, is Dylan Gabriel, just to see what he looks like in the system, what he looks like in an Oklahoma uniform. I think overall, look at kind of the installation of the system, how that differs from what Lincoln Riley's system was. I think watching him just watching him throw the ball, make reads, and things like that, I think will be interesting for people to watch. I mean, there's not a whole lot of competition, obviously. Jeff Levy has already said that there will be no competition. He has the job, and mostly because at this point Oklahoma just doesn't have anyone else that has any game experience. So he's one. I think one really intriguing guy, Mark, could possibly be one of the most intriguing guys in spring is incoming true freshman Javonte Barnes. So I know he's got a lot of notoriety really early on in terms of, kind of where he came in from a body type perspective, where he came in from a kind of a ranking perspective. And, given where Oklahoma is at the running back position, it's a pretty open position right now. You've got, obviously, I think a lot of people almost assume that you have an Eric Gray coming in as maybe the guy that'll start or be in the mix. But you've got Barnes, you've got Eric Gray, and you've obviously got Marcus Major as the three guys that will battle here in the spring. And then certainly you have Gavin Sawchuk that will come in the summer and the fall to compete. But I think just to see his body type and just to see how he runs, how he blocks, things like that, I think will be really interesting to see. If he's a guy that we think that Oklahoma fans and people think that, he can be the guy, maybe not necessarily early on, but he's a guy that'll be able to give Oklahoma a lot of carries and a lot of, kind of the benefit of the doubt of actually having 3 to 4 scholarship kids playing versus, Oklahoma really just, focusing on 2 for a majority of the season last year. Kind of moving on to the wide receiver position, and I'll skip over offensive line, and we can kind of talk through that together, as you had mentioned. So, from a wide receiver position, Jalil Farooq is a guy that I'm very interested in. He's a guy that I think a lot of people think that could make the next step. Had a very good Alamo Bowl game against Oregon. Probably was Oklahoma's leading receiver in that game overall. Didn't really get a lot of opportunities, really, really early on in the season. And so I think it was kind of interesting with Farooq, Mark. A lot of people assumed, because he was very, very close to Caleb Williams, a lot of people assumed that he would kind of just follow Caleb Williams wherever he decided to go. And so having him here and stay here, I think speaks a lot to how much he loves the culture, how much he loves the new coaching staff. And I think the opportunity that he has, with a couple of the receivers that have left, Mario Williams, Jaden Hazelwood, has an opportunity to kind of assert himself, as one of the top wide receivers. And then Theo Weiss is another guy coming off injury last year, and then really just didn't get a lot of opportunity because of those injuries. Just to see how he was injured a little bit in the spring, came back, got injured a little bit more so early on in fall camp. So how he recovers from that, because I think Oklahoma will probably look to have some sort of combination of Jalil Farooq, Marvin Mims, and then you've got certainly Theo Weiss and Drake Stoops in that mix from a wide receiver perspective. So we talked a little bit about Marcus Major in terms of that kind of that three-way battle there with in the running back room. One guy I neglected to mention at the wide receiver was Cody Jackson. Cody Jackson's a guy that played a little bit more in the Alamo Bowl, didn't have a ton of run throughout the balance of the season, but could be a guy that could be in the mix in that top 5, top 6 wide receiver rotation. And I think Mark, probably the area that has the most turnover and really doesn't have as much returning talent is kind of at the H-back tight end position. So in Levy's offense, he does not have there is no H back, so it's everybody's really a tight end. So you've got three guys I think that I'm really interested in looking at. You've got Daniel Parker, who is a transfer in from Missouri. Didn't have a large volume from a catch perspective, but I think it'll be very interesting, not only starting here in the spring, but going through the fall and then the season of how Oklahoma packages him, because I think he's probably the best blocking tight end, fullback, whatever you want to put him call them in that mold. But probably not as good as a pass catcher. And then you've got two true freshmen that's coming in. They kind of remind you, Mark, of a lot of the kids that Iowa State has recruited over the years. 6'4", 6'5", big body tight ends that Oklahoma will have, because Oklahoma obviously has lost a couple. Jeremiah Hall has moved on, and then they've had a couple of kids moved on. So true freshmen Caden Helms and Jason Llewellyn are kids that will fight to have an opportunity to have a little bit of to say in terms of who gets some play there at the tight end position, because you've got Braden Willis that has returning. He's really kind of the incumbent starter there, but then you've got those guys that will probably be asked to provide at the very least a little bit of depth there. And which one of those kids steps up, if one or both of them step up to provide a little bit more depth to that position, would be interesting. And so those are the guys that I have, minus the offensive line. We can kind of get into that as well.
Talking OU football, of course, we do every Wednesday with all of you, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 a.m. where it counts. And spring practice starts in a week. We got Jason here from Last Word on College Football, always gracious enough to make his presence known here on Wednesday. He makes the show go. Otherwise, we don't have a show. So we appreciate Jason being here. And please check out the other segments. So we cut these down if you're not able to make it for the entire show. We cut these into segments. Those are presented here. We've also had Parker Thune on to run through a number of aspects of Oklahoma football here in the last few weeks from 247 Sports. So enjoy the channel and please subscribe. Yeah, the offensive line. In looking at some of the comments from Bill Bedenbaugh that you had referenced, and then looking at them myself today, they're certainly counting on the Cal transfer to be maybe the best offensive lineman on the team, it appears. He's got over 1,700 snaps in his career at Cal, and graded out very well as a high school senior coming into college football, and has continued to progress and become a pretty big-time player, McCade Matower. So him in particular, Anton Harrison seems to be a guy that graded out based on what I see here with 671 snaps is the best offensive lineman coming back from last season. Played all 13 games at left tackle. So we'll start there.
Yeah, I think, and that's interesting. That's the first name that I wrote down, Mark, in terms of players that I'm interested in, just to watch from the offensive line perspective. So you look at a kid like Anton Harrison, worlds of talent. He has all of the measurables. So I think that the challenge with him that Oklahoma has seen this past year is work ethic and having a high motor. I think this is something that I've heard Gabe talk about a lot, is that the measurables are there. He's the prototypical left tackle that you would like to see at a big time program like Oklahoma. But does he have the will? Does he have the desire to be great and to do the things that he needs to do to be great? And so a lot of times last year he didn't necessarily do a great job, Mark, at being consistent. He would have phases where he would play really, really well, but then he would have phases where he would just kind of be out there and have terrible technique and just kind of running through, just going through the motions. So is he one of those that can be, um, can he be the guy that's really trustworthy, from a left tackle perspective? You mentioned McCade Matower. I think he's a guy that Mark, I think, as much as you possibly can, without being on campus, without playing as much. I think you can almost pencil him in as one of these guard positions for Oklahoma. He's been that impressive, I think, early on from everything that I've heard, as well. Andrew Raim, I think, is another one who's very interesting. I think Raim was a kid last year that was, I think, from a technique perspective, I think from a, calling out the defense, knowing exactly what he needs to do. I think he was fine there. I think where he struggled a lot was kind of from the strength and conditioning perspective, because you would see him get pushed around a lot. So I think it's going to be a really big spring for him, and I think more so probably a really big summer for him, just to see, if he can get his strength up to a point to where it necessarily needs to be the anchor for that offensive line. And so, a couple other kids that are really interesting to me that you have listed, and I have kind of listed myself, is Juani Morris. I think he came in, as really kind of a kid that was ballyhooed from Tennessee, played really well, for a couple of years with there, specifically his first year, started almost every game, started a majority of the games his second year, but then, really just didn't. He got off to a little bit of a bad start with some nagging injuries early on, in the fall camp, and he really just didn't make the jump that a lot of people assumed that he would make. I think a lot of people assumed that he would be a starter either on the left or the right side, from a tackle perspective. But he's a guy that Oklahoma is going to look at, as much as any. Mark, our guys is a guy at a position of need that Oklahoma has a loss there, at the right tackle position, as a guy, or even battling at the left tackle spot as well. A couple of younger kids that will be interesting to see how they get into the mix. Jacob Sexton, and then Jake Taylor, two true freshmen coming in. They came in early. They will have the opportunity to battle. The thing that you always worry about from a true freshman perspective, coming in, are they physically ready? Body type, are they ready? Do they have the maturity there? So I think those are two kids that'll get a look, early on, and obviously it'll be interesting to see, to watch them. Savion Bird is another young kid that was talked about early on in the fall camp last year, as a guy that was young, had a lot of talent, but very raw, but was extremely strong, one of the strongest kids on the team. So it'll be interesting to see if he is able to kind of make his way, into the rotation. Either probably at guard, I think, is where he projects, and I think one of the other ones, the last one that I have, written down here, is a guy we've talked about a decent amount, on here, is Bray Walker. Bray Walker is a guy that has been at Oklahoma for quite some time, 4 years. I believe he is a senior this year. Explored the portal and in the offseason here. Didn't really find anything that really was really felt like it was a good fit for him. So decided to come back to Oklahoma. Is he a guy that can make a move here, late in his career? You see a lot of kids that are able to, at some point, the light just kind of turns on, so to speak, and then they figure out what they need to do to be able to, not only be successful but get into that rotation. So he's a guy that's going to be interesting to watch, to see what that will look like. But you got 7-8 guys here that you're talking about, that you're interested to see how that line develops, because this is the biggest question mark for me on the offensive side of the ball, and maybe overall for the entire team, coming into 2022. is, can the offensive line be good enough to allow Oklahoma to be as successful on the offensive side of the ball as they need to be? I mean, you can pinpoint a couple of things. This last year was Oklahoma's probably worst, maybe not worst, but the the least proficient offense that Oklahoma's had over the last 5 years, as well. And one guy that I see a comment on that I missed was Tyler Guyton, who was a transfer over from TCU. He's a guy at 6'7", 300 plus. We'll get a look as well. But I think one of the things that, like I said, one of the things that'll be interesting, Mark, is how this offensive line comes together through the spring and through the fall, because I think it's the key component to Oklahoma having a good offense versus having potentially could be a great offense.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the comments that have come into the channel over the past week since our last show, and a few people took offense to us. Maybe there was a reference either made by myself or you, or maybe by Parker Thune. I don't know what video it was of looking forward to a top 30 offense in the country, and some people took exception to that. Those are not Oklahoma's standards, but yeah, I'm going to be interested to see, with Jeff Lebby coming in, if there are noticeable differences to the style of play, the play calling, run pass ratio, any of those things. And as you say, the utilization of whatever you want to call it, H-back / tight end, seems to be one change that's imminent.
Yeah, I think the knock that Riley had started to get this year and a little bit last year, but specifically this year, is he looked to abandon the run a little bit prematurely, more prematurely that he has in the past, and that's something that you've just really not seen a lot out of Jeff Lebby offenses over the years. So yeah, I'm with you. I think it'll be interesting to see a few differences that you'll see. I mean, there's a lot more motion, I think, that you'll see out of Levy's offense. I mean, you're gonna see a wide receiver go in motion almost, just kind of whether they threaten, kind of that fly sweep from a wide receiver coming across, or they give it to the wide receiver there. I think you're going to see that a little bit more. I think we'll see. I think we'll actually see Eric Gray lined up at wide receiver much more often than we did last year. He seems like he's a perfect guy that I think that Oklahoma will utilize, that Lebby will utilize maybe a little bit less in between the tackles and more trying to get him in space, as kind of a running back wide receiver hybrid. Because he was Oklahoma's best wide receiver at the running back position out of the backfield. So I think that's interesting. I think you'll probably see a little bit more deep ball threats, just willingness to throw it a little bit more than what Riley did, as well. So, but yeah, I think like I said, it would be something that would be interesting. Obviously, interesting to watch, just to see the little differences. But I think not abandoning the run, I think, is a big key that Oklahoma kind of got into from time to time this year. That I think Lebby will be a little bit more patient in being able to kind of work that out.
I don't know how much play he's going to get right out of the gate, but people are intrigued with the athlete. And when I say athlete, the category that he was listed in high school, of Jaron Kanek, 6'3", 210, 6'2", 210, and the number one rated player in the state of Kansas. And just, again, other comments made to the channel, other contributors just citing that he looks to be kind of a gadget player that we'll see if he's ready to go this year or if he's more of a project.
Yeah, he's a guy that I, in my circle, people that I've talked to, that are completely overwhelmed with how he's come in, and not only as a, I think he's a great kid for people that I've heard, but he's more physically ready. He's stronger. He's got the body that's ready to be able to contribute immediately. And I don't know that that will play itself out necessarily on the field, but I think at this point, I think he will have an outstanding opportunity to start um, at one of those linebacker positions for Oklahoma. I think and I heard Parker talking about this, and he's right on the money. I think it's interesting to see what in Venables' scheme, how he fits. I think because at at the onset, he looks like a kid that is just tailor made for Venables' hybrid linebacker safety type of position, that Venables has liked to employ over the years with his 4.4 speed. His I think he's strong enough to play at the linebacker position, and obviously I think fast enough to play in that little hybrid spot. So I think he's a guy that will have a real opportunity, and I think a lot of people will be interested to watch him. I think when you look at him and when you look at a kid like Danny Stutzman, the speed that both of those kids have, I mean, I think is going to be outstanding. Just the coverage of the field that they'll be able to have, maybe a little bit more so than what Oklahoma has had in the past. Now, Brian Asamoah was Oklahoma's leading tackler last year. I think he's the kid that played really, really well as the season kind of went through. So I think it's hard to replicate the experience that he has and what's moved on for him. But in that linebacker room, I would give Kanak and obviously Stutzman a really good chance to start, and something that's going to be interesting to see how they progress early on in spring ball. Because a lot of times you hear some of these freshmen have, whether it's a freshman wall or however you want to call that, at some point, they progress really well, but then, whatever it is, the game starts being a little bit too fast for them, or what that might be. So I think it's interesting to watch their progression here, or specifically Connect's progression here early on in the spring.
Folks, you can talk Sooners with us all the time on our Discord. And if you have no idea what Discord is, I didn't either a couple months ago. It's a big chat room is basically what it is, but it's ongoing 24/7, 365 all the time. So you can jump in there at any point and talk college football. We've got about 50 to 55 folks in our Discord already after just about 2 or 3 weeks since our launch. So you go to Patreon, patreon.com, search MarkRogersTV right there, sign up. I will send you the link, and you're all set to go to join us for college football discussion there on Patreon. And, of course, on our Discord, I should say. And, keep in mind that the more people we get involved, we started with like 5 people talking, and the conversation is going to be limited. But now we're up to 50, 55 people on Patreon and in our Discord, and it will just grow from there. So if we get a contingent of Oklahoma fans, let's say, in our Discord, then we'll open up a chat room for Oklahoma talk exclusively. So right now we've got it divided into 5 major conferences, and we will go from there in regards to how it plays out and what we need to do. But we encourage you to head on over to Patreon, search Mark Rogers TV, and I will send you the link there for Discord. So it's pretty much determined, I take it from what you had to say and also our previous conversations, that Kanak is going to play on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I think so, Mark. I think so. I think, based on, what we previously talked about, his speed versus that being a real need, I think, for Oklahoma at the linebacker, even at the safety position. I think there's probably, now I wouldn't necessarily, discount him as possibly, to your point, maybe some gadget plays or something here and there, utilizing his speed on the offensive side of the ball from time to time. But yeah, I think he'll probably settle into, specifically knowing who the head coach is. I would be surprised to see him being to get taken away from the defensive side of the ball.
So we're just a week away from spring practice, and at that point, of course, it's going to take a while before we really get anything tangible out of spring practice. But at least the head coach Brent Venables and the coordinators will address the media and the players in the first few days, hopefully, I would think. And we'll get a feel for what the direction is and what the priorities are for Oklahoma football in the spring. Do we have a feel for, and this is, again, sometimes I serve up these questions, Jason, expecting you to know everything. And so excuse me, but we'll know so much more in 6 weeks, of course. But how Brent Venables is going to conduct spring practice versus what we saw out of Lincoln Riley, if it's going to be a stark contrast, because we have certainly been discussing and noting the rather stark contrast between the two in a lot of areas in our discussions over the last few months.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. He, listening to Gabe and their podcast a little bit, they had actually asked this question of him, and he really, it was really more of a kind of a coach speak answer. It wasn't anywhere near the coach speak that we've heard in the past, but it was very much, he was more concerned about he's more concerned about the mental side of it for these kids before they kind of worry about kind of the physical side of it. For obviously they're doing both of those, kind of in tandem, right? But I think there wasn't a lot of answers that he had in terms of how that might look. I think, I know that coaches are still a little bit leery of as much contact as they want in the spring to kind of shy away from injuries. But I do think that you'll see a little bit more physical, in terms of the spring practice and even the spring game to a certain degree. You'll see that a little bit more. I think you'll see a more focused approach on tackling. I think Oklahoma has struggled a little bit over the last few years, really just in tackling as well as they need to be, particularly in the open field. So I think those are a couple of things that you'll look at, and I think it's going to look so much different, Mark, this year versus the way that you might see it in the next couple of years, just because there's probably more teaching that's happening this year than it will be maybe in the future. And I say that to say it's a new installation on defense, it's a new install on offense. So I think those will change maybe a little bit as the years progress, when you're not really worried about you've got your culture there already, you've got the offense and the defense already installed. It's really just a matter of kind of continuing that success that you've had over the last few years, hopefully. And so I think that, but yeah, I think a more physical approach to spring ball and practice is what you'll see as maybe the key difference that you've probably not seen as much of in the past.
Kip Lewis being asked about 25th rated linebacker, top 40 player rated in the state of Texas in the 2022 class. The linebacking position is pretty well determined or up for grabs, or do we see anybody like a Kip Lewis that could possibly vie for a significant role?
Yeah, Kip Lewis is one that could. I think there was a lot of comments about Kobe McKenzie. I think he's a guy that I think that has a chance to that absolutely has a chance to compete immediately for a starting spot. I think Kobe's probably a little bit ahead of Kip Lewis, at least coming in early on, and so I think he'll have more of an opportunity there to play and to be in that rotation. Maybe not necessarily from a starting spot perspective, but definitely will challenge, because when you look at what Oklahoma has at the linebacker position, you have David Agwebu that I don't know how how he fits into Venable's scheme. I don't know if he's more of a guy that could be an end, or if he's more of a guy that'll be kind of a prototypical linebacker. Then you've got Deshaun White, who's played a lot of ball at Oklahoma, started a decent amount over the last few years, and so I think. With that being said, Kobe will have every opportunity to maybe, like I said, maybe not start, but maybe be in the mix. I think Oklahoma is really, really talented at the linebacker position right now. So I think a lot of it's youthful talent, but they are I think more talented, and they've got more speed within that linebacker position that we've seen in quite some time. And I think one thing that's very interesting is looking at that. It's one of Venable's things that you've seen year in and year out from him is he will change the look of what that front looks like. Very, very dissimilar, I think, from what Alex Grinch did. I mean, it was pretty much the same thing. There was a lot of movement up front. There was a lot of pre-snap movement, but I think by and large it was pretty much the same front that you would see more often than not. So I think you'll see some prototypical 4-3. You'll see some 4-2-5. You'll see maybe not as much 3-4, but you might see a little bit of 3-4. So that's one thing that you'll see a lot of. So I think obviously the personnel that Oklahoma has in the game from a linebacker position might differ based on what that look is.
We appreciate everybody being here for our Oklahoma show every Wednesday, 11:30 Central Time. And please bring some others with you. So just don't enjoy the show yourself, but please consider bringing some other college football fans. We've got other fan bases represented here. Of course, OU fans we want and deliver to first and foremost, of course, but other college football fan bases represented here. So bring in some fans with you. Let them know that we're here every Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. Central Time. And Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football, check out his work, of course. He makes it all go here on our Oklahoma show every Wednesday. Without him, we don't have a show. So we appreciate Jason being here. And want to remind everyone about our Discord. Go to Patreon, search MarkRogersTV, and go to Discord. The basketball team started the NIT, right? So they missed out on the NCAA. How close were they to making it?
Yeah, I think in most in the areas that I think most people think, I think Oklahoma was one of the first four out. So they just barely against Baylor in the Big 12 tournament. They lost to Texas Tech, who was a 3 seed by 1 in the Big 12 tournament. Had they won that one, they probably would have snuck in. But yeah, no, they made the NIT and played pretty well last night. Won by like 16, 17 points in their first NIT game last night. So yeah, pretty close.
How does the safety position look at this point? We got a question coming in just asking about who might be the starting safeties from Jimmy.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting. I think you've got Key Lawrence. That is, I mean, he's not guaranteed a starting spot, but I would think he's pretty close to as a guy that you can pencil in as a starter that Oklahoma has. He's a kid that moved around a little bit last year, right? Played a little bit of nickel, played a little bit of safety, played a little bit of corner towards the end of the season as well. So, but I think his most natural position is really kind of a strong safety perspective. So I think you'll see him as a starter. I think, honestly, Mark, I think the other safety spot is up for grabs. You got a kid like Bryson Washington, who's played a lot of ball for Oklahoma. Not really been into the mix at all, but he's been around quite a bit for Oklahoma. But I think a lot of people see the transfer from North Carolina, Trey Morrison, as a guy that probably will get that other safety spot for Oklahoma. Yeah, like I said, there'll be some other kids in the mix in terms of that of what that safety position really looks like. Might move some kids around, but I think, coming into it here on March 16th, I think that those two are the guys that you would see as right now as the two starters.
All right, very good. Don't necessarily see too many other questions, whether those be to the live chat here or from anybody else that's commented to the channel. And we get a ton of comments into the channel. Appreciate that, but nothing that we haven't covered in regards to the Sooners with spring practice starting in a week. So come on back next week. And we will do our best to preview spring practice, understanding, everyone, that with 1 or 2 practices in the books at that point, there will be nothing to talk about in regards to what happened on the field that we will know about. But we will have certainly much to talk about in the weeks following. And, of course, previewing spring practice and what's most important. Jason ran down his offensive keys during spring ball this week. We'll look at the defense next week. And do we know of any big recruiting weekends? I know in dealing with other teams that they've certainly had recent recruiting weekends that were pretty important, and some weekends upcoming. Anything for OU?
Yeah, I mean, not a ton in terms of just a big weekend, but I think the spring game is always going to be a big weekend for any teams, but I think particularly for Oklahoma. We've talked a little bit about the Overton brothers actually coming in for an official visit on April 23rd. I think that'll be something to keep an eye on. I think those are going to be 2 big gets for Oklahoma that, believe it or not, are still going to, both of these kids would be part of the 2022 class. So which would be really good for. But I think as it gets closer, Mark, to that April 23rd date, we'll probably start to see some more recruits come in. Even if it's an unofficial, you'll start to see some of those kind of come in a little bit more and have a really good recruiting weekend there.
We've got one nuts and bolts question, and then we'll go to something a little bit more, you could deem it controversial. But, boy, I don't know who this is. Zayaz. Hopefully I got your name right there. Zayaz B. Lou. What about the defensive line?
Yeah, so Oklahoma loses. I mean, I think it's been well documented who Oklahoma loses. 3 really, really solid players on the defensive line. When you look at Isaiah Thomas, when you look at Nick Benito, as well as Perrion Winfrey. So those are the 3. So when you look at the ends starting there first, I think there's a lot of competition there, right? You've got and I'm gonna butcher his name, so I'm not even gonna try to pronounce it. The transfer from Hawaii coming in, I think he'll be part of that mix. Jonah Luau, I think is like I said, I'm probably butchering.
That sounded smooth, Jason. Let's go with that. And certainly if he turns out to be a player, we'll both learn how to pronounce his name.
That's right. So looking at him at one side, I think you've got Marcus Stripling in kind of a little bit of a competition with Clayton Smith, who is really kind of a ballyhooed freshman last year, didn't get on the field, as much. I think he's a guy that will be in the mix on the end. You've got Reggie Grimes, who played pretty well as well at the end position last year. So I think when you look at the defensive tackles, obviously you've got Jalen Redmond, who's a guy that he could be an end or a tackle, kind of depending on how he moves around and things like that. And then I think you've got the guy. Couldn't agree with Parker on this. You don't bring in a guy like Jeffrey Johnson probably to be a guy that's going to be sitting on the bench. So I would think he's a guy that you probably pencil in as a starter. Even though he comes from Tulane, and then maybe there's a little bit of a stigma that comes with that, he was pretty much recruited by almost every major program to come in as a transfer and chose Oklahoma. I think a lot of it had to do with the track record that this defensive staff has had over the years as well. So I think he's a guy that will get into the mix. But you've got guys like Isaiah Coe, Corey Roberson, or just to name a few that would probably challenge for that. Joshua Ellison is another guy that'll probably be in the mix there. So I think I think Oklahoma has a lot of talent, but they do lose a lot. So I think it'll be an area of emphasis early on. And I think it's almost like one of the things that you would say with Jeff Lebby. His offenses has always been strong, right? Whether it's at Baylor, whether it's at UCF, whether it's at Ole Miss, wherever he's been, their offenses have been really good. And kind of the same thing with the Brent Venables, Todd Bates era throughout their years. They've always had really good defenses. So I think obviously you worry about it with how I think Oklahoma was a little bit underwhelming on the defensive line this past year, but I think having a guy obviously like Brent Venables as the head coach, but then a guy like Todd Bates who has done a phenomenal job at teaching defensive line and has been a great coach and has put a lot of really great players into the NFL from Clemson. So I think he will do a great job, and I think that the defensive line will probably be even better than what it was last year.
Oki's got a question here. We can both take our shot at this one, and I don't think it can really be answered accurately. We can only give our perspective on this. So Oki is asking, do you think OU being a Christian-centered team is pushing away players?
Of all the questions that I anticipated today, that's definitely not one of them, but it's a really good question. I think so here's my assessment. The culture is, and I'm not saying anything about what Riley's beliefs were. I think the culture is a complete 180 from where it was at this point last year to where it is now. Venables has talked a lot about not necessarily pushing his belief system, but really kind of giving some of these kids armor to be able to, if they want to have a greater relationship with God, or if they're very interested in that, but they've not been given really an outlet for that. Venables wants to be one of those coaches that really kind of allows that to happen, allows an outlet for those kids that want to strengthen their relationship. And so I think I don't know that it's obviously pushing away players. I don't know to what extent. I think they have been a little bit more, I think choosy is maybe the right word, in terms of not necessarily from a Christian-based perspective, guys. I think it's more so of a fit. They want kids that fit into the culture, fit into the mold of what they're trying to build at the University of Oklahoma, and not necessarily if you're a great player, but you've got to have you've got to have that little extra. Venables talked a lot about, like, I want to know you as a person before I know you as a football player. So I think that approach, I think it will help Oklahoma. I think in the long run, because I think everything that I've heard thus far, Mark and Oki, is the recruits that Oklahoma has brought in. It's made a huge impact early on in some of these recruits, in terms of how different it has been over the previous regime and even other places that they'll go to. So I think it could end up being a good differentiator for Oklahoma as they move forward.
I think I can say this with confidence. Is it pushing away players? probably when you deal with dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of players and going forward, will it push someone away? Probably. But is it also attracting players? And I can pretty emphatically answer that as well. Yes. So there's going to be both to a certain extent. I don't know Brent Venables personally. I don't know Dabo Swinney personally. Of course, Dabo Swinney being the head coach of a major program, we've heard and seen more from him in this regard because of the spotlight being on him. And in addition to just being the head coach at Clemson, with the success that he's had with that program, he's had a platform. So I believe that if you're living out your faith, and I'm speaking of the Christian faith, if you're living that out in such a way that is accurate to biblical beliefs, you can do it in such a way that is going to attract individuals, even if they don't believe what you believe, by just having a culture of caring for people, treating them the right way, loving them, accepting them, and then going forward. And then, as Jason alluded to, giving that the opportunity to strengthen your relationship and learning more and giving that outlet or that opportunity for those individuals that are interested, but then just treating everyone the way that we would all want to be treated. And that would be something that would be attractive to most people if it's lived out.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think you've seen this thus far, and you'll continue to see. Venables is going to model this program to a certain degree, and probably to a fairly large degree, off of I saw that comment. I was trying not to chuckle, but
especially if it's the national championship game, we would like to see what the conclusion is, but
right.
I'm sure we could probably watch that in some fashion, what would have been the replay of it later.
Yeah. But you're going to see Venables model this program a lot off of Clemson's program. I mean, and you just are. I mean, he's got a, he was with Dabo for so many years, and everything that he's done, he talks so glowingly about Dabo. So I think he's it's a program that Oklahoma is going to pattern themselves off of, and to obviously as a assistant, you're going to bring in a little bit of your own, but then use a little bit of that as well. So I don't think it's anything that you should not expect.
All right. We will conclude with that. And again, not necessarily anticipating that question, but we are here to answer anything reasonable. And that's certainly a reasonable topic to bring up. The rest of the show, if you missed it, Nuts and Bolts Football Talk with Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football, as we always bring you here at the Voice of College Football. So again, we would ask that you would subscribe, hit that bell for the notifications. Yes, we 99% of the time are able to make it here Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time, but Jason's got a schedule that involves work and family, myself as well. So sometimes we got to switch it up and deliver the show at another time. So hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. And of course, subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football. Check out Jason's work at Last Word on College Football as well. Jason, appreciate you being here.
No problem. Thanks for having me as always.
Yes, hopefully we'll do it all again next Wednesday and see everybody next week. Check out the videos in the meantime and the other 25 team channels if you're interested in other college football content. And we'll see you next Wednesday.